I'm standing here to seek for your intervention to have the Oversight Committee of this House, which is the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, to intervene and invite the leadership of IEBC.
Invite the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission to a meeting to discuss, among other things, just like happened in 2016, their levels of preparedness for the general election of 2022.
All right, that is the Minority Leader, one John Mbadi, and the Speaker of the National Assembly, Justin Muturi. They are talking about, there is a report that had been presented to them by the Delegated Legislation Committee that recommended quashing of the regulations for the Campaign Financing Act. They actually went ahead to make a resolution to kick them out, and therefore IEBC may not have regulations to implement this because they're supposed to be in place a year to the election. We are now just about 10 months to the election. I want us to look at some of the spending limits that IEBC had proposed, or rather actually gazetted as per the law, that they have to be gazetted at least a year to the election. And this some of the constituencies, for instance, Kiambaa, Bonchari, Juja, Dagoretti North, and Madare. You'll see the population there, the geographical area, and then the maximum spending that is allowed for persons running for those parliamentary seats, ranging from 13.2 million in Bonchari to 19.8 million in Juja. We'll look at the figures later in detail. But also some wards that are affected by these, obviously. Recent by-elections in Muguga, Rurie, London, and Huruma wards. You see the population, the geographical area, but also the maximum spending, which goes up to 3.4 million shillings for the case of Muguga, and just about 3 million shillings for London. The figures are different based on the population of the various electoral areas. For county elections like Machakos, you see the population, but the maximum amount allowed to be spent by candidates running for county seats, this is Senate, woman representative, or governor, is 52.7 million shillings. In Machakos, in Murang'a, it's 39 million shillings. In Garissa, it's 88.7 million shillings, basically because of the geographical area to be covered. And Mombasa is at 39.6 million. Something else to look at is in as far as the seats of governors, senator, and woman reps for other counties, like Nairobi, 117 million shillings is the cap. I don't know whether that's enough to campaign in Nairobi and win a seat. Turkana, 123. Lamu 21.9 million, Kisumu 40.8, and Kakamega 59.7 million. Presidential election, the cap was at 4.4 billion shillings, and the maximum an individual can contribute to their campaign, unless they are the candidate, is 880 million shillings. So this regulation, these spending limits were to take effect in the 2022 election, and there are allowed cost items. They are listed there: campaign venues, campaign publicity materials, campaign advertising, campaign personnel, campaign transport, and logistics. And let me begin with you, former Vice Chair Mahiri Zaja, because you worked at the IEBC. This is a law that came in was enacted around 2013 actually, but never implemented. It was postponed to 2017. It was again postponed in the year 2016. And now there was hope that it would be implemented in 2022. IEBC has gazetted the limits. Parliament says these regulations you brought are time barred, so they cannot be implemented. So what carries the day? The gazetted limits or what Parliament says?
Definitely what Parliament passes will carry the day, because remember, whereas IEBC is mandated to put the spending limits, they are also supposed to table those limits before Parliament 12 months before a general election. And I looked at the report of the delegated committee of the House, and they gave various reasons for having rejected or annulled the Gazette notice, including saying that IEBC had delayed in tabling those regulations. And another reason is that they had tabled regulations of 2016. And there were some errors there which they noted on the regulations, errors on the procedures. And so their recommendation was that the limits again be annulled. So I think there are so many other reasons they've been given by the committee, including even public participation. They said, who did you consult before you came up with these spending limits? And IEBC had put in their report all the groups, the key stakeholders they had consulted, and it was in 2016 actually. So again, this committee faulted them on that, saying that it should have been in 2020. So I think, yes, this is a law. The election campaign finance law was passed in January 2013. Of course, it would not have been operational for the 2013 general election, and the Isaac Hassan team developed the regulations in 2016. These are the regulations that the Chebukati team also came in. When they came in, they revised them and tabled them to Parliament. So I think we are not going to see these regulations in force during the 2022 general election. But I don't know. I don't think I've heard IEBC come out in the open to say what should happen after this, because this was basically in August. This happened in August when they tabled the regulations before this committee. And now Parliament has made a decision. So I think we wait again and see what happens. But
the argument of Chairman Ofule Chebukati was that the law requires IEBC to gazette. It does not require them to take the spending limits to Parliament for enactment. What requires to go to Parliament is the regulations for Campaign Financing Act. So I don't know. So now what happens?
Yeah, the regulations have to be tabled and passed. The regulations have to be tabled and passed by Parliament. So even if they set those limits, against what will they be? If Parliament has rejected those regulations, including the attached spending limits, they cannot implement.
Okay, let's just take a look at some of the key events that have taken place since that year, 2013, so that we're able to understand the context even further. And December 2013, Parliament passed the law, and the law requires regulations to be passed 1 year to general election. Of course, by December, the election was had already taken place. But now, the regulations were never enacted. In December 2016, Parliament rejected draft regulations on account of being time-barred, because this is December 2016, the election was in August, so just about 9 months to election. January 2017, the law was deferred to the 2022 general election, and then the election was held in August 2017. After that, what transpired is that in March 2020, IEBC and the Justice and Legal Affairs discussed amendments, proposed amendments to election laws. In August 2020, IEBC tabled amendments to the law, and amendments not yet processed in Parliament. They are still pending according to different sources. Something else that happened is that 27th of July 2021 is when IEBC submitted the incomplete regulations. On the 5th of August, they resubmitted the 2016 regulations, as Vice Chair Mahiri Zaja says, and the drafts were not obviously enacted. The 9th of August, IEBC gazetted the spending limits, and on the 11th, the committee on delegated legislation nullified the regulations, which they made a recommendation to the House last week, and the House agreed with them. So Section 5 of the Campaign Financing Act says that the Commission shall make rules to regulate election campaign financing in the case of a general election at least 12 months before the election. That's why they're presenting them late July. The Commission shall, at least 12 months before an election, by notice in the Gazette, prescribe the spending limits, including the total amount that a candidate, political party, may spend during an expenditure period. So, Honorable Boss, I want you to reflect on that. Section 18, subsection 1, that IEBC is required to gazette a year 2. What's the role of Parliament in that gazettement of spending limits?
Regulations that are gazetted by state institutions, the executive ministers, various state corporations from time to time have been given the power. Parliament has delegated the power to them to make regulations, except that the law also says that those regulations, once gazetted, take effect immediately, but within 28 days, they need to have been submitted to Parliament, and then Parliament should be able either to approve or approve or disapprove the amendments. So in this case, the Electoral Commission rightly gazetted the regulations, presented them to the Committee on Delegated Legislation, which then deliberated and decided to nullify those regulations and presented the nullification to Parliament, which Parliament agreed with the committee's report. I think what the Chebukati team were doing is because they are required by law to gazette the regulations, they were washing their hands. Just gazette the regulations, whatever happens to them, at least we've ticked the box that we have done our job. Because even them, they knew that it was too late for it to be implemented. And there is a very big debate that needs to go on relating to campaign financing. Because you can regulate campaign financing either by setting spending limits or by having a post reporting of what you spent. And that is actually the easiest one. If I was IEBC, I would have said, you spend what you spend on your campaign, but you just declare it after the election. You say, this is how much I spent. Because IEBC at the moment has no capacity at all to be able to scrutinize whether I spent $1 million shillings or $1 billion shillings. It's an impossibility. There is also very different parameters for deciding. You see, I can decide that I'm going to be using fuel guzzlers, anything over 3,000 cc in my campaign. Somebody else can decide they're going to use the 800 cc vehicles for their or borders for their campaigns. So if you put a spending limit, it's not because I haven't done the same activity as the other person. It's just that I have used a more expensive delivery mode.
Right.
I could decide that I'm going to produce campaign quality T-shirts which are really the cheapest ones, or I could do high quality T-shirts. We'll both have done T-shirts. So when you put a cap, it's really difficult to be able to make that analysis. I know that one of the presidential candidates currently, Jimmy Wanjigi, I think has donated a Rolls Royce, or is it a Bentley, for use by one of his promoters in his campaign. And maybe I'm going to sponsor a border guy to promote my campaign. You can't put me on the same ceiling as him. So this is a very difficult, I'm glad that it has been knocked down, because that is not the method we can use in Kenya, because we have no capacity included. Another way is that we are also, this campaign regulations by IEBC is copied from the West, where people have money donated into a kitty which is known and it is managed under a campaign management. The way we do our campaigns here in Kenya, I could sell a few goats, then finance my campaign for a week, then I run out of money, I go back, sell a few cows, finance my campaign for a week. So ours is not like you have money in a kitty. It's not like the other countries where you fundraise and the money comes into a kitty. So it's not practical.
All right.
It's out. In future, we should plan on declaring after the campaigns. And mostly the reason why you declare is so that if I was funded by a certain industry, then if I'm in Parliament and I'm actually defending them, then I can declare my conflict of interest because they had given money to my organization.
Just some 5 days ago, the French President Nicolas Sarkozy was sentenced to 1 year of house arrest. And this is because he flouted the campaign financing regulations in 2012, because he was supposed to, he spent how much? He was supposed to spend a maximum of $27.5 million. That's about 3 billion shillings. But instead he went almost double. In such countries where this is working, people are hoping that you would regulate how much is spent on the campaign trail so that to make the level the playing field level for all persons, so that you do not have some candidates using money to win over others in an unfair manner.
You know, Sam, there is really a danger in us copy-pasting every piece of legislation. We cannot continue to import laws and hope that they will serve our purpose. You know, in France, for instance, that law is effective and it's serving their purpose very, very well, just like it, I suppose it does in the US and other countries in the West. But coming back to our Election Campaign Finance Act, and I agree with the Gladys, You know, the spending limits that were supposedly published by the IEBC, in my view, and I may be wrong or right, in my view, should be part and parcel of the regulations. Okay? And therefore, they are affected by the 12-month limit. Okay? Time limit. And the Parliament was therefore right in rejecting those regulations. And because even as you pass a law, you must first of all ask yourself, what is the practicability of these laws? What is the enforceability of these laws? Are we just passing laws for the sake of passing them, or we are passing laws to achieve a purpose?
But don't you think...
Yes, in a country where campaigns, where campaigns begin 3 years before elections, sometimes even longer, even earlier than that, how would you monitor the spending by politicians or by candidates? You know, we must ask ourselves very hard questions. And I've heard Honorable Gladys say that she can sell her goods and finance a campaign. This is a country,
and that is why the regulations are coming into place,
which is basically dealing with cash money. You see, how will you even trace it? How will you? I go down home and sell.
That's why the regulations are coming into place.
Some 2 trees of mine, I cut them down and sell and get money to come to finance. So we need to go back to the drawing board.
Okay.
And look at what is going to serve our purpose as a country.
But don't you think, Honorable Pio, because look, 2013 December, the law is enacted. We're in 2021, so it's about 8 years, almost 8 years later. We still haven't passed the regulations. You may blame the IEBC, but what was Parliament doing to ensure that this matter that Kenyans want to see is implemented?
If the whole story is told, you'll realize that there has been a back and forth about this matter. All this time.
There's only back and forth.
I don't want to blame any particular person.
In the election season.
I don't want to blame any particular person or entity. But it is clear that this law is usually resurrected when elections are nearing. Okay? Yes, that's a fact. For sure, it's a pattern. There's a pattern. And I don't think we are going to basically pass laws as a matter of ticking the box. Let's pass it to tick the box that we have passed the election law. How many laws have been passed and are not being enforced? I don't think it's going to help us as a country.
Okay, yes. Senator Lekina, what are your reflections on the essence of this law and where we are now?
I completely disagree with my colleague, because there are 2 pieces of legislation which Parliament has dilly-dallied in passing regulations. One of them is the Elections Act, Section 22, which is now being repealed, that requires every candidate to have a degree. It was postponed for its implementation for 2022. I have taken the initiative and I've brought in an amendment, and so has my colleague Senator Murkomen, to amend that section to be able to allow MCAs to be able to proceed. The Elections Campaign Act, as per the constitutional requirement, Article 88 for subsection 1I, requires IEBC to be able to develop a code of conduct for the candidates and parties contesting in an election. IEBC has done that. It is us, Parliament, who have failed. It is us who sit down. When we get into office, we forget that there are other institutions that are required by the Constitution to be able to interact with Parliament so that they can be able to have a smooth transitioning. If you now say that IEBC is setting up these regulations as a copy and paste from international communities, why did we pass the law in 2013? You know, why is it that it is now that we are crying foul? In fact, on this one, I stand 100% with IEBC, because IEBC has been interacting. I've listened to the commissioners talk about, the chairperson, talk about him having interacted with the Legal Affairs Committee in Parliament to be able to discuss these regulations. In fact, recently, I brought in and I published an amendment to the Elections Campaign Act, which I actually talked about it on this podium, that we wanted, and the memorandum, and I'll read for you the memorandum, is that the proposed amendments are intended to regulate the amount of money that are spent during elections campaign. Number 2, remove the requirement for independent candidates, political parties, and referendum committees to establish campaign expenditure committee to manage campaign funds on their behalf. And number 3, compel the commission to establish donations and spending limits for elections campaign. 4, which is very, very important that no one is talking about here, is remove the requirement for the Auditor General to audit campaign financing and require candidates, political parties, and referendum committee to receive amount for and report to the Commission on compliance with the sets of limits. It is very, very clear. It is us who dilly-dally in Parliament. Let us not blame IEBC. IEBC has done their work. And the problem is that in terms of us Kenyans, all of us, at the last minute is when we realize that National Parliament and the Senate, almost 80% of the people in the National Assembly do not have degrees. When you go into the assemblies, almost 80% do not have degrees. The last minute is when you require, Allah, I'll be kicked out. So now I am going to start bickering about this Elections Act, about this Elections Campaign Act. Yet it is us who spent taxpayers' money, passed those legislation, but then now when IEBC is saying it is about time for us to publish these regulations, you dilly-dally. They do not control the order paper in Parliament. If you go to the order paper, that issue is never listed. You know, so what is going to happen now, and I think Sam, you will invite us again here, is that currently as we speak, even in Parliament, we are taking our sweet time in amending this legislation because maybe it's not in the interest of the majority party. It is not in the interest of the majority party. What is in the interest of the majority party, and you'll see it, you know, fast-tracked, is the NHIF Act. The other day we were being told you must pass this before 20th of October so that it can be signed by the president and announced. You know, why do we have to jump? Why do we have to rush? Why don't we have to take the same process? So now what will happen is this. Kenyans will rush to court and say, oh, I'm being discriminated against. Yet this law has been in effect. And then the courts will do what? Will stop that. It will give an opportunity for candidates to be able to do what? To run. We will never end of this vicious circle.
Right.
We just need to be honest enough and say, if the Constitution, Article 88, requires IEBC to carry out his mandate, if my colleague Gladys Boschole Mweshimua says that IEBC is just ticking their box, they're doing what they're supposed to do. It is us. Okay. The onus is on our side to ensure that we pass the law, agree on the legislation. When IEBC brought that to Parliament, it was way before the 1 year period when this regulation was supposed to be in effect. Go back and look at the Delegated Legislation Committee and see when they received this. You will be shocked.
Right. And of course, some of the laws that are still pending at the National Assembly, you have IEBC Act Amendment Bill, Campaign Financing Act Amendment Bill, Referendum Bill, and Electoral Laws Reform Report with specific recommendations that were submitted to the speakers of both houses a few years ago, still yet to be implemented. There was a meeting of JLAC and IEBC, I believe it was in March last year, discussing on how to go ahead with this. They're still pending in the National Assembly. And because, Vice Chair, you have been there, how does this affect the operations of IEBC? Just before you go there, let's listen to what Wafula Chebukati, the chairperson, said about these pending legislative amendments in the House.
Parliament has its role, the Commission has its role, all stakeholders have their role. And so what has been legislated is known, what is yet to be legislated is known. And so it's an issue that should be discussed. And all we are saying as a commission is that if there are any changes in the election laws, let them be done as soon as possible and before the end of this year, so that then it doesn't interfere with our election operation plan. Because most of the activities will actually commence from January 2022 going forward.
Of course, he's making a case for why IEBC needs laws way in advance for them to plan. I remember in 2017, there actually some amendments were passed within an election. That is after the nullification of the presidential election, before the repeat election. But how do these legislative changes affect the operations of IEBC, because you've been there?
Of course, they do affect the operations of IEBC. And as you've heard from the chair himself, they already are on an election operation plan. They are operating on that with administrative timelines clearly spelled out and the statutory timelines as well clearly, factored in the EOP. So when you come in and you amend the laws a few months to the election, you disrupt the calendar and put a lot of pressure on the Electoral Commission. Remember, they have a lot of activities at this time, and we've seen what has happened even in the procurement of ballot papers. The other day, there was that decision of the procurement board to...
Which is the KIMS technology.
The technology, yes, sorry. Yeah, so they have to go back to the drawing board, and that pulls them back, and here they are with the voter registration process ongoing. So I think this pressure on the IEBC, when they had so much time to do some of these activities, is not really being fair to the Commission. And I'm happy that Mheshimiwa here, Ledama, has really defended the IEBC, and that is the truth, that IEBC has its constitutional mandate. We are discussing election campaign. It is a constitutional mandate. All the other activities they have are statutory mandates. There are timelines. Remember, there are timelines to every activity. So they have to have resources within those timelines so that they can do their work with ease and ensure they are engaging with the stakeholders in time so that everything moves as planned. But when you put pressure on the IEBC and they are unable to deliver, and still you want to throw stones at the IEBC,
right,
we are not being fair as Kenyans. And then the media comes up with headlines, IEBC unable to deliver. This is not fair, really. We all take responsibility.
Right.
Sam, and I'm looking at you straight because I know the media has been at the forefront of putting all these headlines, putting pressure, piling pressure. But what is your role? What can you do? Why can't you work with the Commission to ensure that everything they need is put positively in the headlines so that they can be supported? We have not seen IEBC doing much until the other day when they unveiled the voter registration, the mass voter registration. They had said they didn't have funds, and that is the truth. They cannot go out there and roll out activities they have planned for without money.
Of which, Vice Chair, we have consistently reported about those challenges. I actually remember,
yes, you have.
Way back last year, we even reported about the challenges of pending amendments, implementation of regulations. We reported. But I want us to, I know you want to respond, but as you do that, there's a piece of legislative amendments that has been tabled before. Have they been tabled? Honorable Pio and they will be telling us about that. I want us to take a look at them because they're proposing to make changes to how candidates are cleared to run in elections. And he says that this is to make sure that corrupt leaders or corrupt persons are not cleared to run for offices, or they do not use proceeds of crime to oil their campaigns. Do you have that? Right, and well, we will get back to that shortly, but Honorable Boss, you wanted to respond to the question about IEBC and all this exchange.
Yes. I think the current IEBC, we must actually sympathize with them because they've had great challenges. Usually an electoral commission should operate on an electoral cycle. It's a 5-year cycle. So immediately after elections, IEBC should be undertaking an audit of the past election and then come out with the gaps that existed and then begin to implement either processes or ask for amendments to the laws and regulations to cure those so that they can be in time for the next elections. I think this particular electoral commission has had challenges. Immediately after elections, we had the demonstrations of IEBC must go. And eventually IEBC left. The Isaac commission was kicked out. And then there was the amendment laws in Parliament in order to put in a new IEBC, a good team of IEBC commissioners. And so the commissioners came in halfway. And then once they were in, when they thought they could start working, they immediately, 4 of them resigned, and then they had no quorum, and then after that they were completely beaten. So what IEBC is trying to do now is trying to do in less than 9 months what they should have done in 4 years. Because all that work should have been done over a period of 4 years.
But the oversighting committee, JLAC, they had conversations with IEBC in March 2020.
Yes, but...
And there was no movement.
There was, yes, and that is what IEBC, that's what I'm saying, IEBC has been disrupted so many times. Like even the decisions, when there were only 3 commissioners left, the decisions on whether they can promote laws to bring to the to JLAC was even in question at that time. They've been under a lot of attack by many politicians. So this commission is trying to do everything in a short time. When the law says that IEBC must gazette the regulations within 12 months, it doesn't mean within 12 months. 12 months is the outer limit. It should be actually maybe on year 1. In fact, they should have been doing it on year 2. So and that's why we have to protect our independent institutions so that they are able to work. Because the Electoral Commission, even if you look at their election operations plan, they've put there the electoral cycle, which is an internationally recognized electoral cycle for all electoral bodies all over the world, which IEBC is part of. But unfortunately, they had very serious problems. Right. Even starting the mass voter registration now, it's quite late. But let's say that they are making the most of a very difficult situation.
Of course, they've been complaining that the challenge is resources, to the extent that now they have had to scale down to have just 3 BVR kits in every ward to do the registration within the 30 days. They're saying they don't have resources for the second round unless there's a supplementary budget to make that possible. Let's take a look at what Honorable P. Wandai, the Member of Parliament for Gunja, who is in studio here, is proposing in as far as clearance of candidates. And it's Elections Amendment Bill 2021 that has persons who have formerly been charged in a court of law for offense related to corruption or economic crimes, and the case has not been finalized. It's proposing that they be barred from running for office. A state officer who is formally charged in a court of law for an offense related to corruption shall cease to perform the functions of the office pending finalization of the case in court. Then that a person is not disqualified unless or possibility of appeal, this is the current law, unless possibility of appeal or review of the relevant sentence or decision has been exhausted. And this is what Honorable Pionda is seeking to amend. First of all, there has been that challenge that, yes, it's a good idea so that persons with issues of integrity do not get to the ballot. But then again, there's also the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And even once proven guilty, you have all avenues of appeal all the way to Supreme Court if it's necessary. How do you reconcile that? Well,
I wish I had all the time to explain this, but I'll try to summarize. And you must understand the background of where I'm coming from. You know, there's been a landmark ruling in the past by Justice Mumbi Ngugi, then, of the High Court. Currently, I think he's Court of Appeal judge. That persons, when granting bail to persons charged under the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act, she has, on a number of occasions, ruled that such persons, though granted bail, should keep off the offices. Okay? It has been debated what keeping office means. Okay? Some, of course, have understood it to mean that they don't step physically in the offices to avoid interfering with witnesses or documents. But then the question here is, how do you cure the mischief? And the mischief is glaring, and lawyers are here. You see, I have been charged under the ASECA law. I'm a governor, for instance, and I stay out of my office physically. And I continue to run the cabinet from my mansion in the village. I continue to direct the officers. I'm still in charge. I retain all the authority. What would stop me from interfering with witnesses or fiddling with papers? Nothing. Nothing, absolutely. And what would even stop me from continuing to siphon out public money? Nothing. If I continue to discharge my duties and my mandate from my home. So what I'm trying to do is, first of all, to cure the mischief, which is very glaring, by proposing an amendment to the Leadership and Integrity Act of 2012, okay? To make it clear and in black and white that once you have been charged for corruption or related crimes, and you are a state officer or a public officer, you cease to perform your functions until your matter is determined by court. Okay? That doesn't mean, of course, that you vacate your office. There are two different things here. Ceasing to perform your functions and vacating office are different things. Okay? Secondly, is on the issue of those who have been charged again with corruption and related crimes or offenses and want to run for public office. I am proposing an amendment to the Elections Act 2011 that such persons, during the pendency of their cases, be disallowed from running or from contesting, okay? And this is a time that their cases will have been discharged. Now, the question here is, and I've been asked this question many times, that if, for instance, you are a member of parliament or you are a governor and you are charged and then you are told to cease performing your functions, wouldn't that of course disadvantage you if at the end of the day you are found innocent? That could be true, but there are remedies, there are avenues for you to seek remedy in court through civil action. And lawyers here.
I'll use an example here because you know the member of parliament for Bonchari, Pavel Oimeke, won that seat on an ODM ticket. He had already been arrested and taken to court, facing charges of corruption, demanding a bribe of 500,000 shillings, pleaded not guilty, cleared by ODM, cleared by IEBC to run, of course, on account that he's not, he has not exhausted, he has not been found guilty and obviously not exhausted all avenues of appeal, but he went ahead to win an election. He's now the member of parliament. How would you reconcile that at a time that you're making that that bid while your party is at the same time clearing persons already facing certain cases on account of law?
You know, Sam, I am not legislating with particular persons in mind or particular political parties in mind. What has happened because the law allows it to happen. You see, really, we can't dwell on it. But once this law comes into play, this amendment, then the things will change, obviously. But more importantly, as I conclude, because I know my colleagues want to weigh in, the argument that is pegged on the provisions of Article 99, sub-Article 3, yes, which you have actually highlighted there, that one person must be deemed to be innocent until proved guilty. It's a good argument, and I'm not negating it in any way through this amendment. But you must understand that the Constitution must be interpreted in a holistic manner. In fact, our own Constitution, at Article 259, under the General Provisions chapter, it clearly indicates that when you interpret this Constitution of Kenya 2010, do so in a manner that promotes its purposes. Okay. Yes, values and principles. Okay. And what are the values and principles of this Constitution? You go to chapter 6, go to Article 10. Right. They are very clear, really. So you can't cherry pick an article in the Constitution and then start flagging it. Okay.
Yes. Senator Olekina, Justice Mumbi Ngugi, when she was making a decision on why certain governors are to be barred from office, I want to quote what she said. There have been circumstances in the past in which county governors have, for reasons of ill health, been out of office, and given the fact that the Constitution provides for the seat of a deputy governor, the counties have continued to function. In this case, the applicant is charged with a criminal offense. He has been accused of being or in moral ill health. That's what she said, and therefore went ahead to say that what message does it send to the citizens if their leaders are charged with serious corruption offenses and are in office the following day overseeing the affairs of the institution? There are 3 governors in this country who have been barred from accessing their offices because of corruption charges. Governor Ferdinand Waititu, Governor Mike Sonko, Governor Lenol Kulal. Well, Waititu and Sonko were eventually impeached by their respective counties, but Lenol Kulal continues to serve. But if she presents herself for a seat, a different seat, maybe member of parliament or senator or whatever, or even president, would she be cleared?
I think
would he be cleared?
I think Justice Ngugi's decision is premised on Article 179 of the Constitution, where the Constitution envisioned the executive authority of a county being vested in the governor, deputy governor, and the CCs. It's a collective responsibility. The same article places the governor and the deputy governor as a CEO and the deputy CEO. Now, I have a case in court right now, and that case was advised when there was a case, Samburu, Nairobi, and also Kiambu. And I filed that case. I'm still waiting for the decision. I think that case is under Justice Korir, where I was pushing for the deputy governors to take full responsibility. I know, and this is where I somehow disagree, and maybe not really fully disagree with my colleague, and maybe just advise him on which other direction to take. Because you know, for you to be declared guilty by the public, yet you've not exhausted all legal, you know, avenues for you to clear your name is actually very, very dangerous. The Constitution is very clear that, you know, unless you're proven guilty, you're still a suspect. So I think the best way to proceed with this is to look at other provisions of the law. If you look at the Public Audit Act, Section 31, where the Auditor General really should be among the people who should be assisting these, you know, this legislation that you're passing through, because it is quite clear. When an audit is carried out in a county government, in any institution, Section 31 spells out the audit process. Section 31(5), in fact, gives 31(4), I believe 31(4) or 31(5) gives the person who has the audit has been carried out 14 days to clear the name.
Right.
If after the 14 days they have not cleared the name, then the Auditor General renders their opinion. In my view, no governor, no head of parastatal, or no head of any institution, like public, you know, like the PSS, should be allowed to run in any subsequent office or any other political office unless they have been given a clean bill of health by both Parliament and the Auditor General. Because that one is factual. The auditor has already indicated, they have given an adverse opinion that you have mismanaged public funds, you know. Then why should you be? Yet the Constitution also, and I like what you said, you should not cherry pick. You should not pick a section of the law and say, I'm going to apply this. Article 226, subsection 5 of the Constitution gives you the responsibility, whether you're in office or out of office. So I think my, you know, minority whip in the National Assembly, my advice to you would be this: look at Article 2265, look at Article 179 of the Constitution, and then make up your case. Because when that comes, some of us will challenge it that unless you are guilty, there's no way you should be, unless you've been proven guilty by a court of law, there's no way you should be bad. And a lot of people will have that argument. But if you now couple it with other requirements of the law, the Auditor General has gone through the audit process. You know, they have established that you've mismanaged funds.
Right.
You know?
And from the implementer's point of view, Oliwa at IBC, and of course your reflections now, what is the role of IBC in all this clearance? Because we hear that EACC has a part. Of course, you present your wealth declaration forms. At that time, no one is busy looking at whether what you've declared is the truth or not. But what is the role of all these checking on integrity question before clearing candidates, yet you have so many to the tune of nearly 5,000 across the country?
It's quite unfortunate that the role of IEBC is just to receive the wealth declaration form. And there is a history to this. When the law was being passed, there was a proposal that IEBC should vet candidates, because there is a provision, there is a constitutional provision requiring IEBC to regulate the manner in which parties present people for nominations. So it ended up being that once you're nominated, you present the wealth declaration form. That wealth declaration form of EACC is just one of those boxes any contestant ticks, that Honorable so-and-so have not been engaging in any corrupt. Have you been, you know, engaged in any, have you ever been charged in any court of law? No. It's all no, until you put a signature to it. And if you go back to the history and look at the discussions that were there in the House, and I remember this very well because I was in that team of the Commission, IEBC, and we said here, there's nothing we can do. Parliament, there were parliamentarians who are saying, if you allow IEBC to vet every individual who's going to run for election, then they'll come even and vet you at home. You know, there was such discussions that were so disheartening, and this is one law I feel should be strengthened. Otherwise, the mischief that is here, that, like, for example, Oledama has said that the Auditor General has done an audit, and you are found culpable. Why should you be in office? There is mischief here. Why do you want to be in office? I think we even have an example of I can't remember, Wajir County, where the governor even tried to go back to office. You know, that issue of corruption fighting back. You're culpable, but you want to fight back because you want to go and manage resources, and you still want to siphon public resources and deny the people of the counties their money.
The case of Wajir, the governor was impeached by the county assembly and later confirmed by the Senate, but I don't think he has been found guilty.
Now you see, this is where the mischief is. This is where the mischief is. This is what we are saying. This law needs to be strengthened. Okay. If it has to make sense, we need to rethink, parliamentarians need to rethink this law and amend it so that it can serve its purpose. I don't think it is serving its purpose. Okay.
And Honorable Boss, I want you to reflect on this. John Waluke was charged, found guilty, sentenced with an alternative of a fine running into, I think it was 67, no, it was actually more 67 years and more than $1 billion of a penalty. Then there are three governors who've been impeached already, including Mike Sonko and Ferdinand Waititu. Can these three, Waititu, Sonko, and Waluke, can they run for office in the next election?
Yes, within the law they can run for office, because the law is clear that you're still eligible as long as you have not been convicted, and if you have been convicted by one court, that actually all appeal processes have been exhausted. That means if you have the capacity to go all the way to the Supreme Court, you should have reached the highest court possible. That's the law at the moment. What
if you don't challenge an impeachment? Can you still run?
Sorry?
If you don't challenge an impeachment through the Senate, can you still run?
Remember, you are being impeached for that term that you were there and for the actions that you undertook within. This impeachment motion is normally very specific to certain actions. So the impeachment reflects on those particular actions, not necessarily for the rest of your life. It's not a life sentence. And let me put this into context. What Honorable Wadai is proposing is actually to disturb the doctrine of presumption of innocence. The presumption of innocence is it's almost sacred, you know, in terms of the Bill of Rights. When you talk about rights and fundamental freedoms, throughout the theme of our Constitution, there is a presumption of innocence. The moment you tamper with the presumption of innocence, for purposes of persons who are vying for political office, then it means you're touching the presumption of innocence for people who are actually applying for any other job. So that means today, Sam, if you want to apply for a job, then we will say, no, you have some charge, or you have a drunk driving case that is before you, so you cannot be considered. That means you're being assumed guilty, yet the matter is still pending in court. So that has to be guarded. When you touch it, it's not just for political leaders. It will touch everyone across. Even it will also affect, for example, the issuance of bail. The reason why bail is provided to persons is because we are assuming that they're innocent. That's why we are able to let them out on bail and not incarcerate them, and then just the fact that you've been charged should be used against you. Currently, we need to just strengthen. There is already a process in the public service that when somebody is charged, you are then interdicted, which means you're no longer working in office. You will be on half pay until the matter is concluded. If you're found innocent, then you get the back pay of all your money that is pending. So it will affect other jobs. If I come to the point that has been mentioned about, that's a very slippery slope that you have started on. And you need to look at all the other laws. It can't only be for election purposes. The other issue that Ms. Lillian talked about is about why we take our forms to EACC, wealth declaration forms, and you tick a questionnaire. It is very normal practice. It's called self-reporting, and it's used the world over. When you apply for a visa, they ask you, have you ever been convicted on an offense? You say no. Have you ever been on a drug, whatever? No. Have you ever had this disease, etc.? Have you been deported from any country? You say no, no, no.
But how do you make it now?
The reason for self-reporting is should it is for record purposes, should you be found to have answered no to a question that should have been yes, immediately your visa is revoked, or your citizenship, if you are applying for one, is immediately revoked. It's a way of ensuring that you're tying yourself down in advance. It's a good thing, and we've seen that it's been used on some of the members of parliament at the moment.
Senator Lekina, is this the point you call the mover to reply? And as you reply, you can give your final remark, but how do you shield aspirants from people who just want to be sinister, take a charge to court so that you can block them at the poll?
It's very easy to be charged in this country.
Let me just first of all clarify that this bill that I have initiated, the bills rather, the amendment bills, the two of them, are still at the formative stages. In fact, they are still at the pre-publication scrutiny stage. Okay? So a lot of these views are welcome. Come on board and air them out.
So this is public participation, eh?
But the train obviously has left the station. Yes. Now, secondly, I want us to really look at our history as a country, where we're coming from. And the framers of the Constitution must have had in mind where we're coming from as a country. This was a country which had been ravaged by corruption, where leadership had been actually captured by corruption cartels. So the Federal Constitution was kind of a document that was going to liberate us from the past. And therefore, even if you look at Article 99 again, sub-article 1B, it classifies what are qualifications for one, for instance, to run for position of MP. And then goes ahead to say what then can disqualify you once you qualify. One of the qualifications, which is critical, Sam, is at Part B, that if the person satisfies any educational, moral, and ethical requirements prescribed by this Constitution or by an act of Parliament. And my friend and colleague here was talking about morality, not about legality. How would the framers of this Constitution, what did they have in mind by including this sub-article? What did they have in mind? Did they have in mind that first of all, a court of law must judge you immoral or unethical for you to qualify to run for a position of MP? I don't think so. I don't agree with that. But ultimately,
can I just respond?
Let me just finish.
I think it is quite clear.
Let me just finish.
Read to the end.
But if you look at the other processes, because there's also the mischief that somebody can take you to court on trumped charges to buy you from running for office. But then there are safeguards.
That?
For instance, the DPP is a constitutional office created under Article 157. For a matter to get to the DPP and be processed to go to prosecution, it is presumed that has met the threshold required.
They don't.
You see?
That's why they have a 98% acquittal rate.
Of course, that may introduce another debate here. Let's take a look at feedback, because we are eating into another segment's time. And you've been sharing this via Twitter at Citizen TV Kenya at Sam Gichuku, the hashtag being Debrek. Do you have that? That we can look at what the viewers are saying. And so, Jacob Abere, electoral campaign financing caps in Kenya is a dream. Since 2013, Elections Act has been postponed. I think you mean the implementation of the Campaign Financing Act. Big reasons being the politicians in Kenya are surrogates of money laundering, wash and lootings. Now IEBC are washing hands. Okay, those are your views. Atanas Mavuti, the only way to get money out of politics is to get politics out of money making. But for now, let those who have spent and those who don't have campaign, or those who don't have campaign for those who have, so that they also gain that money. Wow, it's a business, eh? Engineer Lazaro, Kenyans should only be concerned with the funds stolen from public kitty and wired to overseas bank accounts, not people operating companies abroad. The law doesn't prevent us from venturing into lucrative businesses abroad. All right, Anthony Ogden, it's not illegal to own properties abroad, but money kept offshore raises eyebrows. Did you just say regardless? Regardless of how legit it's earned, the taxman KRA loses handsome amounts of tax that would have sustained the country, overwhelmed by foreign debts. Then Anthony Khan, the Pandora Papers address the Kenyatta family wealth abroad and the president as a beneficiary, not the owner. Are state officers also to declare family wealth? Well, good question. Jim Rose, we should all be cautious about the whole Pandora paper report. It's not only the Kenyatta family alone. Almost 35 heads of states are mentioned on the paper. Uhuru himself should come and explain the whole thing. And he said once he returns to the country from the foreign tour, he'll offer more details. We hope and wait to see that. Senator Leda Molekina, former Vice Chair Mahiri Zaja of IEBC, Honorable Gladys Boss, and Honorable Pio Wandai from Ugunja, thank you all for making time for us to have this conversation. We'll continue to have it, and we'll continue engaging on matters elections and IEBC, on whatever is going on in the country. My name is Sam Gituku. Up next is Matters Social. Stay tuned.
Na mtu anakuchapa eti ndio ulinde ndoa yako isivunjike. Waacha ivunjike, wacha ikae.
Kitu kifanyika mtasema sikusema. Your husband is seeing another woman.